Hello there guys, Teacher Krishna here and welcome to our next class for the 4th unit. This is a class that is part of VHEP School and 8 High School. This is week number 30 and we are working on the subject science. So let's start by taking a look at our end in mind, which is the following. Students will be able to design an informative video about the origin and evolution of life, which is a pretty interesting activity to do today. And here you have the summary of the activities that you need to complete so we can be clear about everything you need to do. Number 1, read and summarize topic 6.03. Then, number 2, download and complete the worksheet, Origin and Evolution of Life activity. And, oh, by the way, before we continue, in the case of our summary, remember that from now on, you need to upload it to Educativa, okay? So after summarizing the topic, make sure to upload it to Educativa. And then, of course, you download the worksheet that you find in the topic today. And number 3, use the information you gathered to make an informative YouTube video about the topic. Of course, about the origin of life and evolution. And notice something very important. Minimum, your video must last 7 minutes. Maximum, 10 minutes. So, of course, make sure you take it into consideration and add more information about it. Number 4, upload a compilation of your work to Agilix. So, you can only share a document with the link to your YouTube video, and I will actually use that to grade your video. And by the way, you can double check the rubric that we have at the end of the topic, so you can notice what aspects I'm going to evaluate inside the video, of course. Alright, so just like I previously mentioned, today we are going to study the origin and evolution of life, which is something crazy and of course a very nice topic to study. So, scientists learn about Earth's history by studying fossils, just like the one that you can see right here. So, throughout history, humans have actually found several fossils at different locations. So, of course, then they extract them, they actually study them as well. And just like we studied before, remember that the scientists can use several tools in order to know how long ago these fossils existed or how long ago they lived in Earth. And sometimes fossils can be difficult to interpret. So depending on the location and, of course, let's say the structure of the fossil, it can be easier or more difficult to explain, of course. All right, so now please complete Identify Fossils activity found on page number 1. And once you are done with the activity in page number 1, you can come back here. All right, so welcome back. I suppose you are already done with the activity. And something that it's very interesting to think about is that scientists have discovered many things throughout history. Of course, we have discovered fossils, and of course, scientists have theorized the way all life has evolved on Earth. But here is the discussion that has been going on for millions of years, I would say. Because what happens is that, of course, at some point, life started on Earth. So, different scientists have found evidence that there were some particles that are named RNA particles, which are, let's say, some kind of genetical information, okay? So, these particles were formed inside another particle or another molecule that helped it to start developing copies of this RNA. And then, of course, with the pass of millions of years, what happened was that these particles started being replicated, and of course, they were generating new life forms. So from a very simple particle, from a very single cell, let's say, many different organisms were evolved. So we can talk about fish nowadays, we can talk about jaguars, giraffes. If we go some million years ago before, we can talk about dinosaurs and much more. So the question about this is, was the start of all of this replication of RNA, and of course, where all of these changes just made by coincidence, like something that just randomly happened, or was it something more divine related, let's say? So the like a superpower being or like an omnipotent being actually interfere in the creation of life. So I can tell you that we don't really have a clear answer. I guess it depends on what you believe. So if you want to believe in evolution, of course, you have all of the materials to believe that all of this process and all of the creatures that we have nowadays are just coming from evolution and nothing else, just mere coincidence and adaptation about for millions of years, let's say. Or you can go otherwise on the religious side, let's say, in which if you believe so, then God actually interfered in the creation of life. So it's something really interesting to talk about, and I would like to expand this a little bit more during the class. Because, as I was telling you, there is not correct answer so far. There are just many hypotheses and many things that you can believe true for yourself. But we'll talk about it. I'm interested about knowing your opinion during what we are going to have in class today. So let's continue. We're going to talk about fossils right now. And this is a very interesting fossil. And once you analyze it, you can actually relate it to many species that are living nowadays. And of course, scientists can study the way the organisms that inhabited Earth millions of years ago lived like. And we have some special scientists, which are paleontologists, and they are scientists who analyze fossils and construct their stories. A shelled fossil was found at the top of Mount Pangaea. Such fossils are typical of marine animals. So how is it possible that we have a fossil that is commonly found in marine ecosystems that we can actually find it at the top of a mountain? How is that possible? So basically, this is the work of paleontologists. And if you go over the topic in Agilex, you are going to find a very interesting video in which they give you different possibilities. But the most accurate one is the one that specifies that once, let's say that the top of the mountain was at the bottom of the sea, or it was right under a body of water. So I'm pretty sure that you have studied before the rock cycle and the formation of mountains. So with the pass of millions of years, then the ground can actually elevate itself and form a mountain. So what scientists are theorizing is that this animal, or this fossil that you can see right here, once died at that specific piece of ground. Over millions of years, then the ground started elevating and then it formed the mountain. And that's exactly why a fossil that is part of marine ecosystems was found at the top of a mountain, where there is nearly not enough water to actually conserve this kind of animals there. And something very important to notice is that fossils only form when they meet ideal conditions. Remember, there are different categories of fossils. And we have studied them before, and of course, if we go back to the names of the categories of fossils, we are going to find mold, cast, imprint, trace, amber, and petrified. You can always go back to some previous videos in case you would like to review some of the information about these topics. And remember that fossils are not only imprints, so there are many things, just like we have studied before as well. Let's continue talking about biological evolution. So how did it take place? And of course, if we talk specifically coming from the science field, and many scientists believe that we come from, let's say, a sort of monkey. It's not actually a monkey, but actually monkeys and us have the same forerunner, let's say, or the same ancestors, which is known as the Homo sapien. And so how is it possible? Evolution explains the way organisms change over time and the way they adapt to their environment. So, when we talk about evolution, we can find many different examples, like birds. Where do birds come from? So scientists theorize that birds come from dinosaurs. So how come from a very huge T-Rex, let's say, very terrifying and gigantic T-Rex, can be produced a chicken, which is non-terrifying and of course a very little animal? Well, scientists theorize that it's because of evolution and because other evidence that they have found in the bones of chickens as well as the ones of dinosaurs. But basically, it states that the more the environment changes, then the more the species have to change in order to survive. So, of course, we're talking about a massive extinction when it came to dinosaurs because of the collision of an asteroid that actually hit Earth, specifically on Mexico. So the atmosphere changed, and of course, the life that was gathering of dinosaurs, living species, changed totally, and it forced them to change as well. Of course, not all of them could survive, but the ones that did actually evolved into the birds that we know nowadays. Of course, chickens are one of them, and many more birds. Scientists have theorized that dinosaurs went through a mass extinction due to the impact of a meteorite in Mexico. It changed drastically the biosphere. Only those species that managed to adapt were able to survive. This is known as natural selection. Natural selection is a very simple term, and it states that the ones that adapt are going to survive, and the ones that don't adapt, they are not going to survive. Adaptations result from genetic changes in organisms. And this is what I was telling you about. So if we go back to the start of life on Earth, so there were these particles of RNA or genetic material that were put together by mere coincidence, let's say, and they were packed up inside another molecule that is sort of reproducing that genetic information. But depending on the needs or depending on the necessities that those bacteria or species had at the moment, they started to change. And they evolved in many different species and many other things that we know nowadays. And actually, it's very interesting to think that all of us come from one single species from before, from the original species on Earth, let's say. So absolutely everyone come from that species. We can say that monkeys, humans, horses, dogs, giraffes, whales, absolutely all animals you can think of come from that specific particle that was once generated millions of years ago. Lastly, we're going to talk about the effects of changes. The oldest precursors of life are bacteria. But what happened before bacteria? Scientists theorize that there were virus-like molecules that became more and more complex over time. This process is known as chemical evolution. So these virus-like particles are the particles that I was telling you, RNA. And RNA can be easily copied, and of course, let's say that you can copy and paste this information pretty quickly. If, of course, these particles enter another life form or the specific, let's say, source that is going to reproduce it. And one of the greatest questions that scientists have is, how did life appear from non-living components? Because we have to agree in something. Before these bacteria and virus-like particles appeared, there was no life at all. And of course, let's say that absolutely everything was inorganic. Like if you go to the moon right now, you're going to find a lot of inorganic materials, but you're not going to find life-like components or life-like chemistry, let's say. So how did all of this actually started? How did life came to place? Well, from the scientific perspective, you're going to say that it was a coincidence at first when getting all of those components together. And then evolution was part of building up all of the beings that we know. And if you go from the other side, from the religious side, you're going to say that there was a divine being that actually took part of the creation of life. So we are going to discuss a little bit more during our live session. But from now, this is it for me for now. And I will be seeing you around in a couple of minutes. So goodbye, everyone, and always take care of yourselves.